Et nous sommes donc le 20 mai 2025. C'est important de repréciser, surtout quand vous regarderez le replay, peut-être dans quelques mois, ça remet toujours en contexte, surtout dans un monde où tout change énormément. Il faut savoir s'adapter, bien sûr. La transition écologique des villes, c'est pas qu'un sujet technique. On l'a vu depuis ce matin, on l'a largement vu et on va continuer de le voir. C'est un projet urbain aussi. Et oui. Et pour l'introduire, je vous propose d'accueillir Hélène Chartier, qui est directrice de l'urbanisme du C40, le réseau mondial des grandes villes engagées pour le climat. Hélène, sous les applaudissements, s'il vous plaît.
Bonjour. Ah, super.
Hello everyone. Here is the remote.
Merci beaucoup pour l'invitation.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
25-30 minutes de donner un peu
I've been asked to give an idea of what cities do in terms of urban planning and climate change in 25 to 30 minutes. So I will try to set the scene on this specific topic. So maybe very briefly on urban planning and urbanization. 55% of humans of this world live in cities. We will probably reach 70% in the 25 coming years, so 2.5 billion people living in urban areas in the world. So we estimate that buildings in cities will double by 2050. So urban planning is extremely important in this objective to adapt to climate change. But it's important to get a closer look. We know that 90% of this increase will happen in two places, in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia, and particularly very urban areas of these two regions. Urbanization is not the issue. It's the demographic increase that is the issue. And urbanization, a compact city can be an opportunity to preserve natural environments, and we know that it's extremely important in the fight against climate change. And living in cities, and many studies show this, it facilitates a more sustainable way of living. So transportation, consumption, to have a low carbon approach, to have smaller housing, to share walls, and this has an impact on reducing emissions. But in order to do that, especially for cities that will face this huge increase of population within their cities, it's very important to anticipate and to plan the future of the city. So it can be to plan how many people are going to come in, to plan enough housing, especially accessible ones. It means that we need to plan cities so that people have access to services, to infrastructures, equipments, and also to try and avoid to develop the city in the places that have been identified as risky or in natural areas that are natural protection areas against climate change. So urban plans are crucial after climate plans. Many cities today, especially the one of the C40 network, have made a plan, urban plan with data and a very scientific base on what they have to do. Cities know what they have to do. The real topic is how do we implement it, what we call at the C40 network the mainstream. And urban planning, urban rules are extremely important and useful. Cities and local authorities have a huge power there, and these are legally binding elements. So all the projects on territories, the ones developed by the cities, but also by individual owners, by investors, they must follow some rules. And it's within these urban rules that we can frame this organization of the city. So urban planning is not the only factor of emissions, but it's a tool to accelerate resilience and the reduction of their emissions. So if we try to explain in more details the fight against climate change, we have two legs. The one which is to reduce emissions, to try and stop the acceleration of climate risks, and the adaptation of places. So what is good urban planning to reduce greenhouse gases? Many studies show that the urban model that was developed after mid-20th century does not work anymore with the car. We have introduced this new way of transportation, which is the car, and instead of gaining time, we have created longer distances and increased time. So not only our public places have been transformed and changed so that cars could be at the heart and the core of things, and we have destructured cities. We have made them longer and further away, and we have fragmented places in cities. We have residential areas, we have business areas such as La Défense in Paris, we have commercial areas. Why? Because we need to have everything, and we didn't need to have everything close to us, sorry, but we could go everywhere with the car. So we have increased the need for mobilities. And this urban model that we call the modernist approach, Le Corbusier, etc., has created many problems that cities have today. The increase of emissions, air pollution, an excessive consumption of natural land, but it hasn't improved people's way of living. Now traffic creates longer time that you spend in your car. We also have many neighborhoods where we don't have any services, so no life really. So in terms of impact, it's very clear in the IPCC report. If we adopt an urban planning based on mixity and on public transportation, and to try to organize life around this public transportation, could reduce emissions by 25% by 2050, which is an extremely important leverage. So these 25% come from three big areas. So the first one, if you have a more compact city, more people around public transportation, you will reduce your transportation emissions automatically. We know that independently from cities' transportation systems, Atlanta, for example, in America, has 10 times more transportation systems than Barcelona, for example. The second part is buildings emissions. We know that in a city, we generally have buildings that are smaller, especially housing, and we have shared walls. And these shared walls are quite a direct way to reduce buildings emissions. The need for cooling, for heating, but also for building materials. There has been a study in Canadian context that what we call a detached individual house consumes twice the consumption in building in comparison to a house in a city. So the compact model in cities is also to reduce buildings emissions. And the third side is to protect natural environments and areas, the ones that are around cities. we extend cities and we eat and use natural environments, and these are natural carbon sinks. So we have diminished by 11% the carbon sink sequestration between 1990 and 20 in comparison, to 2000. But today, emissions are growing 50% more rapidly than the population. So it's not because there is more people in cities, but it's because the model grows more than what we need. And numbers, particularly the one from the UN, say and show that if we don't change urban planning, urban areas could growth by 3 times by 25 years. So if we look at northern countries, we cannot really teach anything because we are not good in this area. So in France, in the UK, in the Netherlands, numbers are quite catastrophic on urban expansion. The individual house, if we look at the UK and France, individual houses are 56% of all the houses in France. And there has been the ZAN planning the reduction of this. Of this. So another important one, which is in the UK, is that they had green belt around large cities, limiting the expansion of cities. So the government just deregulated this, and there has been an explosion of individual houses in Great Britain. 51% of renting houses investments were in individual houses in comparison to 5 years before, where it was 5%. So this really hurts the fight against climate change. So if we look at southern countries, they will face the increase of urban population, and many of these cities are planning the expansion of their cities, and they don't want to densify or regenerate urban areas. So we start to see in Latin America and in Africa, residential area in peri-urban areas, and this new trend, new cities, as we've seen with the new care or the line, becoming a new model of management. And it's not a great model in terms of urban planning aligned with climate objectives. So this was to explain the big concepts to link urban planning and emissions. So now if we try to look at adaptation to climate change, I will now go very rapidly on these slides. You all know that climate risks are not just one risk, it's a polycrisis, including the increase of floods, of extreme heat, of landslides, of droughts, of wildfires. I'm not going to read this slide, but all the indicators show that there will be economic and human impacts, sometimes 3 to 4 times more in the next 20 to 25 years. Urban planning does not cause directly extreme heat or extreme rainfall, but we know that the way that cities have developed exacerbate the impact of these natural disasters. We know that urban growth in areas identified as risky for floods is stronger. We know that in southern countries, so the ones that are going to really explode in terms of demography, it's 90% of urban expansion are already made in risky areas. We also know that in the world, 1 person out of 5 lives in an informal habitat, housing. So there's not enough houses for these new urban people. So we know that these people are even more vulnerable. Cities, in the way that they are developed, erase permeable spaces, and it's 30% of green areas that have disappeared between 1990 and 2010. 2020, sorry. So it really exacerbates the risks and vulnerability. For example, I will give you 2 very concrete examples. Last year in Brazil, what happened, such as in Valence this year, with a lot of loss, especially human lives and material. So we studied what happened, and there was development that was excessive in areas that were already identified as floods and risk of floods. The soil was supposed to be able to be permeable and to be able to take in all the water, all the big constructions that were adjusted to make them more easily developable, but that haven't included draining systems to protect these houses, these buildings, and a low capacity to manage urban planning rules. So if we combine all of these factors, then we estimate that human losses have doubled in comparison to if we actually did apply the rules. In Phoenix, in America, which is Phoenix, the hottest places in America, it's very clear that all the design and urban planning has exacerbated difficulties that they're having today in terms of urban heating. So massive expansion of concrete infrastructures, buildings with glassy reflective windows. We know that this really adds a lot of heating in cities. Urban planning policies that have failed to prioritize permeable areas, green places, and architecture shapes that do not allow air and to breathe in the cities. So I find that this is extremely interesting. We see that we can have up to 8 degrees more than in peri-urban areas. So you can tell me that we need to push for more density, but at the same time, you're telling us that it's exacerbating heat in cities. What is interesting here in this graph is the drops, showing that as soon as we introduce nature in cities, even in a compact area, we do manage to lower the heat by 3, 4 to 5 degrees sometimes within dense areas. So to finish, I want to end on a more positive note. I want to show what cities do to reduce their emissions and to adapt to climate change.
we will try to sum it up in 5 big principles. So first, we need, especially in northern areas, to stop urban expansion. Demography in France does not justify urban expansion. We need to have regenerative urban planning and compact cities. Secondly, we need to stop this model of monocentric city with a very dense city center. We need to have a different model. We need to have a polycentric system. Thirdly, we need to focus on transportations and to make sure that jobs are being served by these transportation systems. Fourthly, we need to create public spaces, helping with more walking, more social life in public spaces. And finally, to have a bioclimatic urban planning, integrating climate risks in their areas and to secure places for nature and nature-based solutions. I want to show 3 of these principles, and that reminds us of European cities. We are not reinventing the wheel. These are not technological solutions. When we look at models in Europe, they used to be compact, naturally mixed, and public spaces were more oriented towards people. So, if we could just go back to these models, would be a big step forward. How do cities make this? For example, Portland, in the northwest of the United States, has a very small city center, and they just took many measures. So the Oregon state has limited the urban growth in the region of Portland, and they have deleted all individual housing areas, and they are dividing the parcels in the city to make sure that it's a multi-family approach to densify it, and it will slowly densify the city. It has had a very interesting impact on of an environmental point of view, but also on the cost of housing, because by reducing the size of the houses, they have also reduced the rents to pay. The University of Berkeley in California has analyzed the actions of 700 cities, and they have realized that to build cities in cities is the first action to take and to implement to reduce emissions. Compact does not mean poor or high, high. There have been studies that show that cities with high density, quite compact, could be maybe the most efficient in terms of emissions. We need to make compact cities something that is livable and desirable. And some voices, since the beginning of this modernist behavior movement, have said that we need to make the case for a compact city and to have walkable spaces without cars, and there has been new interest around this vision in Paris, for example. We've seen this with this what we call the city, the 50 minutes neighborhood. So it means that you can access everything within 15 minutes. And I want to pay tribute to Jean Jacob, who is Canadian and in the 70s already wrote about this polycentric city
composed and made of separable neighborhoods that can be walked to. And I really invite you to read her works. So we really need to look into how they integrate this polycentric vision in their urban plans. Seoul is a very good example of it. The urban plan of Seoul has defined 3 urban centers, 7 metropolitan centers, and 12 local centers, and 100 neighborhood plans, where they are really developing a new ascendant approach with access to services and to develop areas that are much more flexible, allowing the functional mixity in Seoul. Curitiba in Brazil was really pioneer for the trans-oriented development, so to really concentrate new populations around transportation systems with functional mixity that is compulsory and social housing objectives that were more important around transportation systems. So what is the result? They've started that around the 80s, and today 90% of the travels in Curitiba are done thanks to BRT, so the rapid bus lanes, and this has decreased by 35% the consumption in fuel in comparison to other Brazilian cities that have not implemented such measures. What is also very interesting is to see that in the Great Paris, the Grand Paris, with the polycentric revolution that is going to happen, it will link 68 new stations, all the suburbs, and this will reinforce, strengthen peri-urban areas. And we know that this is where the new needs in terms of jobs, the housing will happen. And maybe we will reach the limitation here. When we move on to adaptation to climate change, these are some examples. Medellin, for example, that combined 2 approaches with the Green Belt approach called Circular, and they have a green belt of 75 kilometers around the Medellin hills to protect the forest, and this is to reduce the landslides and floods that were impacting Medellin very badly. The Cape Town, has defined a coastal erosion, a coastal line, and has forbidden the building too close to the coast, because we know that with the increase of the sea level will be a huge problem. So they have defined 3 different areas depending on the projections of sea level increase. Venice, in Italy, is already impacted by huge floods, have created a MOSE system, which are mobile dams, which allows waters to be blocked and not to go in. So there was a lot of controversies around this project because it was extremely expensive, and also it did have an impact on lagoons and ecosystems. Many other actions are happening in the world, and I wanted to talk about the Jakarta wall. And there is another project that is extremely controversial. I don't support it, but it's important to wonder, does adaptation justify everything? Copenhagen are building an artificial island supposed to protect them from sea level rise, but also to host 35,000 houses by 2070. So a lot of ecologists are against this because of, like in Venice, biodiversity, but also is it not a new expansion of urban areas. So if we go back to methods that we at C40 are pushing for, is to really push for a permeability of the ground, of greening, and we need to have 30 to 40% of public spaces. The rest would be private. So how can we make sure that all of the city's projects contribute to these permeability objectives and greening? This, when we start with Paris, this is what they're starting to do, and to make sure that all the projects must contribute to greening and permeable spaces. Medellin here again has been pioneer on green corridors, so to really green, to plant trees all around the big avenues and water and rivers to bring freshness from the trees, and it was one of the first big cities with such measures to reduce the effects of heat islands, and they have reduced by 3 degrees the temperatures in a heat period.
En Espagne est en train d'accélérer très fort sur ce qu'on appelle les plans d'ombrage, non seulement à travers.
So Barcelona in Spain is speeding things up, just like planting trees, just like in Medellin, but at the same time they are actually providing shades and with areas with shades, mostly for places where the kids can play in urban areas. So they start protecting inhabitants of extreme heat waves and making life outside pretty much unbearable in some times of the year. We also have climate, refugees, and the block projects to include shaded areas. Another city which was a pioneer was Frankfurt in Germany, and the administration planned the city by thinking about cold air drafts, fresh air. We know the city is surrounded by mountains with 2 rivers, and they actually carry automatically the wind and fresh air. So they designed the city to make sure that fresh air drafts can come across the city, so can actually capture the wind and the fresh air. And so we can actually use this to have enough fresh air in public and open spaces. And fire, we know that many cities are starting to be afraid of fires, and that's a direct consequence of climate change. A few weeks ago, I read a newspaper about an article saying that we have a fire season started in Canada. It's kind of scary to think that we have a fire season in Canada, and cities are starting to be afraid of fires. So in the Cape Town in South Africa, they started to include buffer areas around residential areas, so they can actually buffer areas. And between residential areas and at-risk areas. Another example is the city of Los Angeles, and it's now mandatory to use highly reflectable materials on the roofs, and Toronto added more. It's important to reduce the temperature of the neighborhoods so we can reflect the light in the public areas. And a final example, in Singapore, we know that the droughts will become a problem like Barcelona every year now. And Singapore is the 5th country most threatened by climate change. So they decided to have 17 reservoirs and water tanks to collect as much rainwater as possible. I'll stop here The idea was to give you a snapshot of what we do and to give you some examples if you want to know more. We just published a guidebook for climate actions. Thank you very much, Hélène Chartier. You were just a reminder that you work at C40, the big cities united against climate change. It was very efficient.